47 minutes, the groundskeeper said quietly. The room laughed. 47 minutes later, nobody was laughing anymore. The Operations Command Center at Ridgeway Energy Campus hummed with the familiar rhythm of a normal Tuesday morning. Monitors glowed beneath rows of fluorescent lights. Engineers reviewed diagnostics. Managers shuffled reports from one side of the conference table to the other. Outside the massive glass windows, the early spring sun stretched across nearly 200 acres of carefully maintained grounds. Everything looked stable. Everything looked safe. And that was exactly why nobody paid attention to Nathan Cole. Nathan stood near the back wall wearing a faded green maintenance jacket with the campus logo stitched above his chest pocket. Dirt clung to the soles of his work boots. A pair of worn leather gloves protruded from one pocket. To everyone else in the room, he was simply the groundskeeper, the man who trimmed hedges, the guy who fixed irrigation lines, the quiet single dad who spent most of his days riding a utility cart through flower beds and service roads. Nobody expected him to speak during executive meetings. Nobody expected him to understand the systems powering one of the most advanced energy facilities in the state. And nobody expected him to interrupt a room full of experts. Yet that was exactly what he had done. 47 minutes, Nathan repeated. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room grew still for a moment before a few scattered chuckles broke the silence. Vice President Carl Mercer leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. 47 minutes until what? More laughter followed. Nathan's eyes never left the wall of system monitors. Until the backup grid fails. This time the laughter came easier. A young engineer shook his head. Another rolled her eyes and returned to her laptop. Carl exchanged an amused glance with several department heads. Nathan, he said, choosing the patient tone people often used with those they underestimated. The backup grid passed inspection last month. Nathan nodded. I know. Then why exactly is it going to fail? Because something changed. The room fell quiet again. Not because they believed him. Because they wanted to hear how the groundskeeper planned to explain himself. Nathan stepped closer to the display screens. His expression remained calm. The vibration frequency in Transformer 3 shifted 3 days ago. Several engineers exchanged puzzled looks. The cooling cycle started running 6 seconds longer every hour yesterday. More confusion. Nathan continued. And at 5:14 this morning, the backup load regulator began compensating for a fault it hasn't identified yet. Carl blinked. How would you even know that? Nathan looked toward the windows. Beyond the glass stood rows of maintenance pathways stretching toward the distant power structures. I heard it. A burst of laughter swept through the room. Someone nearly spilled their coffee. Another manager shook his head. You heard it. Carl asked. That's your diagnosis? Nathan didn't react. The system is telling us something is wrong. Through sound. Through patterns. Carl sighed. We're discussing engineering data, Nathan, not feelings. The room nodded in agreement. Nathan remained silent for several seconds. Then he checked the digital clock mounted above the conference room door. 9:13 a.m., 47 minutes, he said once more. After that, you'll see it for yourselves. Olivia Bennett sat quietly near the center of the table. As director of operations, she was responsible for every department within the facility. She was known for her intelligence, discipline, and trust in measurable facts. Unlike the others, she wasn't laughing. She wasn't convinced either. But something about Nathan's certainty bothered her. Not because he sounded emotional. Because he sounded precise. People guessed. People worried. People speculated. Nathan wasn't doing any of those things. He sounded like someone who had already seen the future. Do you have evidence? Olivia asked. Nathan turned toward her. Not the kind you'll accept. The answer irritated several executives. Carl smirked. Then I think we're done here. Chairs shifted. Laptops closed. Conversations resumed. The meeting moved on. Yet Nathan remained standing. Calm. Patient. Unmoved by the dismissive smiles surrounding him. As the executives returned to discussing quarterly performance targets, he looked once more at the clock. 9:14 a.m. 46 minutes remained. Outside, a cool breeze swept across the campus. Somewhere beyond the parking lots and maintenance roads, hidden behind concrete walls and steel barriers, a faint mechanical vibration echoed through the infrastructure. Most people would never notice it. Nathan did. He always did. Because while everyone else saw a groundskeeper maintaining the property, Nathan saw something entirely different. He saw systems. He saw patterns. And right now, every pattern he knew was pointing toward the same unavoidable conclusion. In less than an hour, the entire facility was about to discover that the quietest man on campus had been the only one listening. Nathan Cole did not wait for anyone to believe him. He never had. By 9:15 that morning, he was already back outside, driving his aging utility cart along a winding service road lined with maple trees and carefully trimmed hedges. The executive meeting continued behind glass walls and polished conference tables, but Nathan had returned to the place where he was most comfortable. The grounds, the earth, the quiet spaces between buildings where people rarely paid attention. The spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and damp soil. A maintenance flag fluttered gently beside a retention pond reflecting the morning sun. Everything appeared peaceful. That was the strange thing about trouble. It rarely announced itself loudly. Most of the time it whispered. Nathan had spent most of his life learning how to listen. A flock of birds lifted from a nearby tree as his cart rolled past. He glanced toward the distant power structures rising beyond the northern edge of campus. Massive steel towers stood against the bright blue sky. Thick transmission lines stretched across the horizon. Most employees barely noticed them anymore. Nathan noticed everything. He slowed near a fenced service corridor and switched off the cart. Silence settled around him. Not complete silence. The world was never completely silent. There was always something speaking. Wind through leaves, water moving underground, electrical systems humming beneath concrete. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. Then he listened. The vibration was still there. Faint. Rhythmic. Wrong. He checked his watch. 45 minutes. A few years earlier, none of this would have seemed unusual. There had been a time when Nathan was simply another father trying to balance work and family. There had been a time when his life followed predictable patterns. Then everything changed. His wife passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone with their young daughter, Emma. Grief had a way of rearranging a person's priorities. Some people chased bigger opportunities. Others buried themselves in work. Nathan chose something different. He chose simplicity. Ridgeway Energy offered steady hours, health insurance, and enough income to keep a roof over their heads. Most importantly, it allowed him to be present for Emma. Every morning before school, they shared breakfast together. Every evening, he helped with homework at the kitchen table. Every Friday, they watched old movies and ordered pizza from the same family-owned restaurant in town. It was not a glamorous life. It was a good life. Nathan preferred it that way. Yet despite the quiet routine, there were parts of him he never talked about. Skills he never mentioned. Knowledge he never displayed. Most people saw exactly what they expected to see. A groundskeeper with dirt on his boots. A widowed father trying to get by. Nobody looked deeper because nobody believed there was anything deeper to find. His phone buzzed softly. A text message appeared on the screen. It was from Emma. "Good luck today, Dad." Nathan smiled. The message was followed by a small heart emoji and a picture of her science project sitting on the kitchen counter. He typed back immediately. "Proud of you, kiddo. See you after school." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Are they listening this time?" Nathan stared at the screen. The smile faded slightly. Children noticed more than adults realized. Emma had heard similar stories before. Times when he had spoken up. Times when people dismissed him. Times when he had simply walked away rather than argue. Nathan typed a short reply. "Maybe." Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket. A maintenance worker approached from the opposite direction carrying a toolbox. "Morning, Nathan." "Morning, Rick. You look worried." Nathan glanced toward the power structures again. "Just thinking." Rick laughed. "That usually means trouble." Nathan offered a faint smile, but said nothing. The man continued on his way. Above them, sunlight reflected from rows of glass office windows. Employees moved between buildings carrying coffee cups and laptops. Deliveries arrived. Meetings continued. Schedules remained intact. The entire campus functioned with the confidence of a machine that believed it was operating perfectly. Nathan checked his watch again. 41 minutes. Somewhere inside the facility, Olivia Bennett sat reviewing operational reports. Somewhere else, engineers monitored dashboards filled with reassuring green indicators. Everything looked normal. But Nathan knew that systems rarely failed all at once. First came the small signs. Then the ignored warnings. Then the moment when everyone realized they should have listened sooner. A cool breeze moved across the campus again. This time the vibration underneath it felt slightly stronger. Almost imperceptible. Almost hidden. But not hidden enough. Nathan slowly turned toward the northern sector and listened carefully. The pattern had changed. Only slightly. Yet enough to confirm what he already feared. His expression grew more serious. The clock was still ticking. And with every passing minute, the distance between prediction and reality was growing shorter. The vibration reached Nathan again at 9:22 a.m. It was still subtle enough to escape every sensor that mattered and every dashboard that executives trusted, but it was no longer the same signal he had heard before sunrise. Something inside the system was adapting, correcting, straining, like a person forcing a smile while hiding exhaustion. Nathan followed a gravel maintenance path that curved toward the northern perimeter of the campus. Freshly cut grass lined both sides of the road. Sprinklers clicked in the distance. A delivery truck rolled past without slowing. To everyone else, it was another ordinary workday. Nathan stopped beside a chain-link fence overlooking a restricted utility corridor. Beyond it stood rows of electrical equipment protected behind concrete barriers and security gates. He rested one hand on the fence and listened. The sound was not loud. It was never loud. It was a faint rhythmic pulse hidden beneath layers of normal operation. Most people heard machinery. Nathan heard relationships. He heard how one component influenced another. He heard timing, balance, patterns. And today those patterns were slipping out of alignment. His phone buzzed again. This time the caller identification showed Olivia Bennett. Nathan stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello. A brief pause followed. Nathan, this is Olivia. I know. Another pause. I have a question. Nathan glanced toward the utility corridor. I figured you might. Olivia exhaled slowly. He could hear the faint background noise of office conversations behind her. One of our engineers found a cooling irregularity in the regulator cluster. Nathan closed his eyes. How large? Small. Very small. For now. Silence followed. You sound awfully certain, Olivia said. I am. The confidence in his voice unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Can you explain something? She asked. How did you know? Nathan looked toward the horizon, where transmission lines stretched across the bright morning sky. Because systems talk. Machines do not talk. Everything talks if you learn how to listen. Olivia did not answer immediately. She was a woman trained to trust evidence. Data. Reports. Documentation. Yet the facts were beginning to move in Nathan's direction. Not dramatically. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to create doubt. And doubt was dangerous for people who built careers on certainty. How much time? She finally asked. Nathan checked his watch. 38 minutes remained. Less than 40. The line went quiet again. I will call you back, Olivia said. Nathan ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Somewhere inside the administration building, Olivia stared at a growing list of anomalies. Tiny discrepancies. Small enough to dismiss individually. Impossible to ignore collectively. She stood from her desk and walked toward the engineering department. Through glass walls, she could see analysts studying monitors. Numbers scrolled across screens. Green indicators still dominated the displays. Everything technically remained operational. Yet the confidence she had felt earlier that morning was beginning to crack. Run another diagnostic, she instructed. We already did, one engineer replied. Run it again. Meanwhile, Nathan continued along the perimeter road. A maintenance shed stood near the far end of the property. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of motor oil, fresh lumber, and old coffee. Tools hung neatly on pegboards. Equipment manuals occupied a shelf in the corner. Above a small workbench sat a framed photograph. Nathan picked it up carefully. The picture showed Emma smiling beside her mother years earlier. The sunlight in the photograph looked warm, hopeful. For a moment, Nathan simply stood there. Then he placed the frame back on the shelf. Still listening, he said softly. Outside, the wind shifted direction. The vibration changed again. Stronger now. More urgent. Nathan stepped back into the sunlight and looked toward the center of campus. Employees continued moving between buildings unaware of what was approaching. Conversations carried across sidewalks. Coffee cups changed hands. Meetings continued. The ordinary rhythm of life marched forward. Yet beneath it all, hidden from nearly everyone, an invisible countdown continued. 36 minutes remained. And for the first time that morning, Nathan was no longer the only person beginning to worry. Olivia Bennett had built her reputation on facts. Numbers did not have emotions. Data did not lie. Systems either worked or they did not. That belief had carried her through 15 years of promotions, difficult decisions, and high-pressure responsibilities. Yet as she stood inside the engineering control center at 9:29 that morning, certainty was becoming harder to find. Rows of monitors illuminated the room with soft blue light. Engineers moved between workstations reviewing diagnostics and performance reports. The air smelled faintly of coffee and warm electronics. Everything still appeared normal at first glance. But Olivia had stopped trusting first glances. "Run the regulator analysis again," she said. One engineer looked up from his station. "We already completed 3 scans. Run a 4th. The engineer exchanged a brief look with a colleague before turning back to his keyboard. Nobody argued. Olivia rarely repeated instructions. Minutes later, a fresh set of results appeared on the central display. A young analyst frowned. "That is strange." Olivia stepped closer. "What is it?" The analyst pointed toward a small fluctuation buried inside several pages of technical data. "The regulator compensated again." "For what?" "We do not know." Another engineer joined the discussion. "The correction should not be happening." "Is it dangerous?" Olivia asked. "Not by itself." "Then what does it mean?" The room grew quiet. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one of the senior engineers spoke. "It means something is forcing the system to work harder than it should." Olivia felt an uncomfortable sensation settle in her chest. 31 minutes. That was roughly how much time remained according to Nathan's prediction. She hated the fact that she had calculated it without meaning to. Across campus, Nathan sat alone on a wooden bench near the maintenance shed. His utility cart rested nearby beneath the shade of an old oak tree. He held a small notebook in one hand. The pages contained handwritten observations collected over several days. Dates, times, temperatures, vibration patterns, tiny details most people would overlook. To Nathan, small details often revealed the biggest truths. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. He listened again. The sound beneath the wind was clearer now. Not louder, more organized, like a warning slowly assembling itself. He checked his watch. 30 minutes. His phone buzzed. Another text from Emma. "How was your day?" Nathan smiled despite everything. "Busy. How is school?" A reply arrived almost instantly. "Science test today. I think I did okay." "I know you did okay." There was a brief pause. Before another message appeared. "Are you worried about something?" Nathan stared at the words. Children had a remarkable ability to notice what adults missed. A lot like systems, he thought. Sometimes. Nothing you need to worry about. "Promise?" "Promise." He slipped the phone away and stood. Somewhere beyond the trees, a maintenance vehicle moved slowly across the property. Workers carried on with their normal routines. The campus looked peaceful. Yet the feeling in Nathan's chest continued to grow heavier. Inside the administration building, Olivia walked toward her office carrying a stack of reports. Halfway down the hallway, she stopped. Through a large window, she could see the northern utility sector in the distance. The same direction Nathan kept watching. She opened the latest diagnostic summary. Another anomaly had appeared. Small, technical, easy to dismiss. Yet it matched the pattern Nathan had described. Olivia closed the report and stared out the glass. "Who are you?" she whispered. Back in the engineering center, another alert quietly appeared on a monitor. Then another. Neither severe enough to trigger alarms. Neither large enough to stop operations. Yet together they formed a picture nobody wanted to acknowledge. One engineer shifted uneasily in his chair. "Maybe we should notify operations." Another nodded. "About what?" A supervisor asked. "We do not even know what we are looking at." The younger engineer hesitated. Then he said something nobody expected. Maybe the groundskeeper was right. The room immediately fell silent. Not because they believed it, because none of them wanted to consider the possibility. Outside, sunlight reflected off the glass buildings and parking lots. The clock continued moving forward 1 second at a time. 28 minutes remained. Nathan could feel the pattern accelerating now. The system was no longer whispering. It was trying to be heard. The question was whether anyone would finally listen before it was too late. At 9:36 a.m., the atmosphere inside Ridgeway Energy Campus began to change. Not dramatically. Not enough for alarms. Not enough for panic. Just enough for confidence to become uncomfortable. "Olivia." Bennett stood in the engineering center reviewing a growing list of irregularities. The numbers were still within acceptable ranges. The systems were still technically operational. Yet every new report seemed to point in the same direction, toward the warning she had dismissed less than an hour earlier. A senior engineer approached carrying a tablet. There is another fluctuation. Olivia looked up immediately. Where? Backup, load distribution. How significant? Not significant by itself. Olivia almost laughed at the phrase. She had heard it 4 times already that morning. Not significant by itself. Not dangerous by itself. Not unusual by itself. Yet together they were forming a pattern. And patterns had a way of becoming problems. Show me. The engineer placed the tablet on the conference table. Charts and graphs filled the screen. Tiny spikes appeared where smooth performance should have existed. Olivia studied them carefully. How long has this been happening? The first signs appeared 3 days ago. Why was it not reported? The engineer hesitated. Because nobody thought it mattered. Olivia looked away from the screen and stared through the glass wall toward the northern utility sector. Somewhere out there, Nathan was working as if nothing unusual was happening. She found that strangely unsettling. Most people would have been trying to prove themselves right by now. Most people would have been demanding attention. Nathan had done neither. He had simply made his prediction and gone back to work. Meanwhile, Nathan drove slowly along a maintenance route bordering the eastern side of campus. His utility cart rattled softly over the pavement. Flower beds stretched along the roadway. Newly planted shrubs waited for summer growth. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically in the distance. Everything still looked normal. Yet the vibration underneath the ordinary sounds had changed again. Nathan stopped the cart and listened. There it was. Stronger now. More frequent. Like a clock ticking beneath layers of concrete and steel. He checked his watch. 24 minutes remained. His expression stayed calm, but inside he felt the same disappointment he always felt. During moments like these. Not frustration. Not anger. Disappointment. Because problems were easiest to solve when people listened early. Pride often made solutions harder than they needed to be. His phone buzzed. This time the number belonged to Carl Mercer. Nathan answered. Hello. Nathan. Carl sounded less confident than he had during the meeting. We need to talk. Nathan looked toward the distant administration building. About what? Some of the engineers are reviewing your concerns. Nathan remained silent. Carl cleared his throat. Can you come to the control center? Why? Because things are not matching our forecasts. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. They are matching mine. Another pause followed. Can you be here in 10 minutes? Nathan glanced at his watch again. You do not have 10 minutes to waste. Carl said nothing. For the first time that morning, the executive sounded uncertain. Nathan finally replied. I am on my way. He ended the call and turned the utility cart toward the center of campus. The autumn-colored maintenance jacket fluttered slightly in the breeze as he accelerated. Across the property, employees continued moving through their daily routines, unaware that an invisible countdown was approaching its final stage. Inside the engineering center, Olivia watched another report arrive. The room had grown quieter. Conversations were shorter. Smiles had disappeared. People were beginning to sense what none of them wanted to admit. The system was changing. A young analyst suddenly looked up from his monitor. That should not be happening. Every head turned. What is it? Olivia asked. The analyst pointed at his screen. The regulator just compensated again. For what? I still do not know. The room fell silent. Somewhere beyond the walls of the building, Nathan's utility cart rolled steadily toward the control center. 21 minutes remained. And for the first time that day, the people responsible for protecting the system were beginning to understand a difficult truth. The groundskeeper they had laughed at might be the only person who truly understood what was coming. Nathan parked the utility cart beside the operations building at 9:41 a.m. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed the difference. Earlier that morning, people had smiled when they saw him. Some had laughed. Others had barely noticed him at all. Now conversations stopped as he walked past. Engineers glanced up from their screens. Managers exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody seemed quite sure what to say. The atmosphere had changed. Not because Nathan had demanded respect, because reality was beginning to move in his direction. He entered the control center and found Olivia standing beside the main operations table. Several engineers surrounded a wall of monitors displaying system data. Carl Mercer stood nearby with his arms crossed. though the confidence he usually carried seemed noticeably weaker. Olivia looked at Nathan first. "Thank you for coming." Nathan nodded. "How much time?" Carl asked immediately. Nathan checked his watch. 19 minutes. The room grew quiet. One engineer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another stared at a monitor as though hoping the numbers would suddenly change. They did not. Olivia stepped forward. "Show us what you see." Nathan looked around the room. "You want the short version or the honest version?" Carl sighed. "The honest version." Nathan turned toward the central display. The backup grid is compensating for a fault that has not fully surfaced yet. Every correction creates additional stress somewhere else. The system believes it is solving the problem. It is actually spreading it. An engineer frowned. "That should not happen." Nathan nodded. "I know. Then why is it happening?" Nathan pointed towards several data streams displayed on the screen. "Because the regulators are responding to symptoms instead of causes." The room remained silent. Olivia watched carefully. "Can you prove that?" Nathan studied the numbers for several seconds. Then he reached toward a keyboard. Nobody stopped him. He entered a sequence of commands and opened a report hidden beneath multiple diagnostic layers. Several engineers immediately leaned forward. "Wait," one of them said. "How did you know that file existed?" Nathan ignored the question. Instead, he highlighted a pattern buried deep within the operating logs. The room stared at the screen. Tiny irregularities appeared across multiple sectors, individually insignificant, together impossible to dismiss. "There," Nathan said quietly. "The problem started here." Nobody spoke. An older engineer adjusted his glasses and moved closer. "We never checked that sequence." "I know. How did you find it?" Nathan shrugged. "Because it was the only place nobody was looking." Carl rubbed his forehead. "Can it be fixed?" Nathan looked back at the clock. 17 minutes remained. "Not before the failure begins." Several people exchanged alarmed glances. Olivia remained calm. "Then what can we do?" Nathan walked slowly around the operations table. His voice stayed steady. "Prepare." "Prepare for what?" Nathan met her eyes. "The system is going to protect itself." Another engineer shook his head. "Systems do not make decisions." Nathan looked toward the wall of monitors. "The good ones do." The room fell silent again. Outside the large windows, sunlight reflected across the campus parking lots. Employees continued walking between buildings unaware of the growing tension inside the control center. Phones rang. Deliveries arrived. Meetings continued. Ordinary life moved forward while an invisible countdown approached its final minutes. Nathan studied the displays once more. The vibration he had been hearing for days now appeared clearly in the data. Not because the system had become easier to understand, because the problem had grown too large to hide. Olivia stepped beside him. "You have seen something like this before." It was not a question. Nathan remained quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Where?" His eyes stayed on the monitors. "A long time ago." Olivia waited for more. None came. Nathan rarely volunteered pieces of his past. He had spent years learning how to carry difficult memories quietly. The engineers continued analyzing data around them. Every few minutes another anomaly appeared. Every few minutes another assumption proved wrong. Confidence was disappearing. Humility was taking its place. A young analyst suddenly looked up from his station. The compensation rate just increased. Everyone turned toward the screen. Nathan checked his watch. 14 minutes. The pattern was accelerating exactly as expected. Olivia saw it too. For the first time all morning, she felt something she rarely experienced. Fear was not the right word. Respect was closer. Respect for the possibility that the quiet groundskeeper standing beside her understood this system better than the people who had built careers managing it. Nathan looked at the clock one more time. Then he spoke softly enough that only Olivia could hear. "It is starting." The clock on the control center wall changed to 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes remained. Nobody in the room was laughing anymore. The easy confidence that had filled the building earlier that morning had been replaced by something quieter. Engineers spoke in lower voices. Managers reviewed reports for the third and fourth time. Every new piece of data seemed to confirm what Nathan had been warning about from the beginning. A sharp notification appeared on one of the monitors. Then another. Not alarms. Not yet. Just warnings. Small indicators that something deeper was moving beneath the surface. Olivia watched the screens carefully. Status update. A senior engineer straightened in his chair. Load balancing is becoming unstable. How unstable? Enough that we cannot explain it. Olivia looked toward Nathan. He stood near the back of the room with the same calm expression he had carried all morning. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just focus. What happens next? She asked. Nathan stepped closer to the central display. The system will start protecting critical functions. An analyst frowned. That is automatic. Nathan nodded. Exactly. Another engineer looked up. You keep talking about the system like it is alive. Nathan studied the scrolling data. Not alive. Predictable. He pointed toward a series of numbers moving across one monitor. Watch that sequence. Several engineers leaned forward. For nearly 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the pattern shifted exactly as Nathan predicted. The room grew still. One analyst quietly whispered, "How did he know that?" Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Across the campus, the morning continued as normal. Employees attended meetings. Grounds crews worked near the southern entrance. Delivery vehicles entered through security checkpoints. The sky remained bright and clear. It was the kind of beautiful spring day that made people feel safe. Yet inside the operations center, safety felt increasingly fragile. Nathan checked his watch. 12 minutes. His phone vibrated softly. A message from Emma appeared on the screen. Lunch was good today. I got an A on my science test. For the first time all morning, Nathan smiled. Proud of you. Her reply arrived immediately. Are you smiling right now? Nathan shook his head slightly. Somehow she always knew. Maybe a little. Good. Mom would like that. The smile faded into something softer. Nathan slipped the phone back into his pocket. For a brief moment, the noise of the control center seemed distant. He thought about Emma sitting in her classroom. He thought about the life waiting for him after work. The small house. The dinner table. The ordinary moments that mattered more than titles or recognition. Then another warning appeared on the monitors. Reality returned immediately. Compensation rate increased again, an analyst announced. Olivia looked at the display. How much? 7%. A senior engineer's face tightened. That should not be possible. Nathan glanced toward the clock. 10 minutes. It is possible. Carl Mercer stepped forward. The executive who had mocked Nathan earlier now looked exhausted. Tell us what we need to do. The room turned toward Nathan. Not because of his job title. Not because of authority. Because he was the only person who seemed to understand what was happening. Nathan remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke carefully. Stop trying to force stability. What? One engineer asked. You are fighting the wrong problem. Nathan pointed at the data streams. Every correction creates more stress. Olivia immediately understood. You are saying our response is making it worse. Nathan nodded once. The system already knows something is wrong. You keep telling it nothing is wrong. The room fell silent. Another engineer slowly leaned back in his chair. That is exactly what the logs show. Nobody argued this time. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned whether the groundskeeper belonged in the room. Outside the windows, sunlight reflected across the campus buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a maintenance truck moved along a service road Nathan knew by heart. Ordinary life continued only a few hundred yards away. Yet inside the control center, every person could feel the countdown approaching its final stage. Nathan looked at the clock again. 9 minutes remained. The pattern had accelerated. The warnings were arriving faster. The numbers were changing exactly as expected. Olivia watched him carefully. You knew this was coming days ago. Nathan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the screens. Yes. Then why did you stay? The question surprised everyone. Nathan finally looked at her. Because leaving would not help anyone. No one spoke after that. The room settled into a deep, uneasy silence. 8 minutes remained. And for the first time all morning, everyone in the control center was listening. The clock reached 9:52 a.m. 7 minutes remained. Nobody had left the control center. Nobody wanted to. The room had become the eye of a gathering storm, not because of noise, but because of silence. The engineers who had spent years trusting the system now watched it with growing uncertainty. Every screen displayed movement. Every report revealed another inconsistency. And every inconsistency seemed to arrive exactly when Nathan expected it. Olivia stood beside the main operations table, studying a live system map. Small indicators blinked across the campus network. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Yet the pattern was unmistakable now. The system was shifting resources faster than normal. Another redistribution event, an analyst announced. Sector 4, asked Olivia. Sector 4 and Sector 7. Several engineers exchanged worried looks. One of them shook his head slowly. That should not be happening simultaneously. Nathan glanced toward the display. It is trying to isolate the fault. The engineer looked at him. You keep saying that like you have seen this before. Nathan remained quiet. Outside the control center windows, sunlight still bathed the campus in bright spring colors. Trees moved gently in the breeze. Employees crossed walkways carrying coffee cups and folders. A maintenance crew worked near the southern parking area. Everything looked peaceful. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, thousands of interconnected systems were quietly struggling to maintain balance. Olivia noticed Nathan staring at the display again. There is something you are not telling us. Nathan folded his arms. There are a lot of things I am not telling you. Like what? He looked at her calmly. Like the fact that the regulator is not the real problem. The room immediately turned toward him. What do you mean? Carl asked. Nathan pointed toward a secondary data stream hidden along the bottom of one monitor. Everyone keeps watching the symptoms. Then what are we missing? Nathan stepped closer. His finger moved across a series of timestamps. This. An engineer leaned forward. That is environmental monitoring. Exactly. What does that have to do with anything? Nathan looked at the screen. Everything. Confused expressions spread across the room. Nathan opened another report. Then another. Slowly, the connection began to appear. Tiny fluctuations that had seemed unrelated suddenly lined up across multiple systems. Cooling, load balancing, regulator activity, environmental controls. Every anomaly followed the same timeline. The room grew still. That cannot be a coincidence, someone whispered. Nathan nodded. It is not. Olivia stared at the data. How did nobody see this? A senior engineer answered before Nathan could. Because nobody was looking for it. The words hung in the air. They sounded painfully familiar. Nathan checked his watch. 6 minutes. The countdown was entering its final stage. A soft notification sounded from another workstation. Then another. Several engineers turned toward the screens simultaneously. The compensation rate increased again. How much? Olivia asked. 12%. A low murmur spread through the room. Nathan remained calm. The numbers were arriving exactly where he expected them to arrive. Olivia noticed. His composure. You already knew that was coming. Yes. How? Nathan looked at the monitors for a long moment. Because systems leave footprints before they fail. Nobody laughed at the statement. Nobody dismissed it. The room had moved beyond skepticism. Now there was only curiosity and concern. Carl sat down heavily in a nearby chair. The executive who had mocked Nathan that morning now looked 10 years older. What happens in 6 minutes? Nathan glanced toward the clock. The same thing that was always going to happen. Can we stop it? The question lingered in the room. Nathan considered it carefully. Not completely. Several faces fell. Then Nathan continued. But we can decide what happens afterward. Olivia studied him. There was no fear in his voice. No panic. Only preparation. It reminded her of someone who had already accepted reality and moved on to solving the next problem. Another engineer suddenly looked up from his station. Hold on. Every head turned. What is it? Olivia asked. The engineer pointed toward a screen displaying archived personnel records. I found something. Olivia frowned. What? The engineer swallowed. I was trying to figure out how Nathan knew where those hidden logs were stored. The room became quiet again. The engineer stared at the screen. Then he slowly looked up. According to this file, Nathan Cole should not know those systems. Nathan's expression did not change. The engineer's voice lowered. Because according to these records, he helped design them. For a moment, nobody in the control center moved. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. According to these records, he helped design them. The young engineer stared at the personnel file on his screen as if he could not believe what he was reading. Olivia stepped closer. Show me. The engineer enlarged the archive document. A photograph appeared beside a much younger version of the name everyone in the room now knew. Nathan Cole, Senior Systems Architecture Consultant, Lead Infrastructure Analyst, Strategic Grid Optimization Team. The dates stretched back nearly 15 years. Several engineers exchanged stunned looks. One quietly sat down. Another removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Carl Mercer stared at the screen. That cannot be right. It is right, the engineer replied. The credentials match. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Outside the windows, the bright spring morning continued without interruption. Cars moved through the employee parking lots. Birds crossed the blue sky. Somewhere beyond the campus, families ate lunch, attended classes, and carried on with ordinary lives. Yet inside the control center, the entire story of the quiet groundskeeper had suddenly changed. Olivia slowly turned toward Nathan. "You designed part of this facility?" Nathan looked at the monitors rather than the people. "Part of it. Why did you never tell anyone?" Nathan's expression remained calm. Nobody asked. The answer silenced the room again. For minutes remained. A warning indicator flashed on one of the monitors. Then another. The engineers barely noticed. Their attention remained fixed on Nathan. The man they had assumed spent his days mowing grass and maintaining flower beds had once been one of the people responsible for building the very systems they were struggling to understand. "You were a systems architect?" asked one analyst. Nathan nodded. "Years ago. For facilities this size? Bigger." The room became even quieter. Olivia folded her arms. "Then why are you working grounds maintenance?" Nathan finally looked at her. There was no embarrassment in his eyes. No defensiveness. Only a quiet honesty. "Because my daughter needed a father more than this industry needed another expert." Nobody had expected that answer. Carl looked away first. Several engineers suddenly became very interested in their monitors. Nathan checked the clock. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. "We can discuss my resume later." His voice remained steady. "Right now we have work to do." The shift in tone immediately pulled everyone back to reality. Olivia nodded. "What do you need?" Nathan stepped toward the operations table. "I need everyone to stop chasing the symptoms." Several engineers gathered around him. This time nobody questioned his presence. Nobody challenged his authority. Respect had arrived. Quietly, the way truth often did. Nathan pointed at the system map. "The fault began here." He traced a path through several interconnected sectors. Everything after that was a reaction. Olivia studied the display. "If you are right, then half the alarms are distractions." "Exactly." An engineer's eyes widened. "We have been responding to the wrong events all morning." Nathan nodded once. "And the system has been trying to compensate for us." Another notification appeared. Then another. The frequency was increasing now. The countdown was becoming visible even to people who had ignored it earlier. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Olivia watched Nathan carefully. The more she learned about him, the less sense he made. A man with his knowledge could have worked anywhere in the country. He could have led major projects. He could have earned awards, promotions, recognition. Instead, he spent his mornings trimming hedges and repairing irrigation lines. Yet standing in the center of the room, surrounded by engineers and executives, he seemed completely comfortable. Not because he wanted attention, because he wanted solutions. "Nathan," Olivia said quietly, "did you know this exact scenario would happen?" Nathan looked at the clock. "Not exactly." "Then how were you so accurate?" He considered the question for a moment. "Because systems are not very different from people." Several engineers looked puzzled. Nathan continued. "When something important is ignored long enough, eventually it finds a way to be noticed." The room fell silent. 2 minutes remained. Across every monitor, new warnings appeared. The patterns were accelerating. The fault was finally surfacing. And for the first time all day, everyone in the control center understood the same thing. The countdown Nathan had predicted was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The clock changed to 9:59 a.m. Every eye in the control center was fixed on the monitors. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls had moved, but because uncertainty had taken up all the available space. Rows of screens displayed live operational data. Numbers updated every second. Warning indicators multiplied across the system. Map. Nobody was speaking unless absolutely necessary. The countdown had become reality. 1 minute remained. Nathan stood at the center operations table, studying the displays with quiet concentration. Olivia remained beside him. Carl sat forward in his chair. Engineers waited at their stations with hands hovering over keyboards. Outside the windows, the campus still looked perfectly normal. Sunlight reflected off office buildings. Employees crossed sidewalks. Delivery trucks moved through service roads. The ordinary world continued completely unaware of what was happening beneath its feet. Compensation rate increasing again, an analyst reported. "How much?" Olivia asked. 18%. Another engineer looked up immediately. "That is impossible." Nathan shook his head. "No. It is expected. The analyst swallowed. 45 seconds. Nobody corrected him. Everyone knew exactly what he meant. The clock on the wall continued moving forward. 44 seconds. 43. 42. Nathan watched the numbers scroll across the primary display. The pattern was now unmistakable. The hidden fault had exhausted every automatic correction available to the system. For days it had adjusted, adapted, protected itself. Now it was reaching its limit. Sector 7 just shifted load again, someone announced. Sector 4-2. Olivia stared at the display. They are trying to isolate the fault. Nathan nodded once. Yes. The engineer nearest the monitor looked stunned. That is exactly what is happening. 30 seconds remained. The room grew even quieter. A faint hum from the equipment racks became suddenly noticeable. The soft clicking of keyboards sounded louder than usual. Every person present could feel the tension. Not panic. Anticipation. Nathan checked the sequence one final time. Everything matched. Every stage. Every response. Every warning. Exactly as predicted. Carl looked toward him. You knew all of this? Nathan answered without taking his eyes off the screens. I knew the pattern. 20 seconds. A yellow indicator turned red. Then another. Several engineers immediately reacted. Load instability confirmed. Backup synchronization failing. Voltage compensation exceeding limits. Olivia's eyes moved rapidly between displays. The reports were arriving faster now. The system was no longer hiding the problem. It was revealing it. 15 seconds. A young analyst whispered something under his breath. Another gripped the edge of his desk. Nobody looked away from the monitors. 10 seconds. Nathan remained perfectly still. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Then it happened. Across the primary display, dozens of status indicators changed simultaneously. The room filled with notification tones. Screens updated faster than anyone could follow. Multiple sectors automatically disconnected from the backup grid. Several monitoring windows went dark before restoring themselves through emergency protocols. Engineers immediately began calling out status updates. Sector 7 offline. Automatic isolation confirmed. Backup transition failed. Rebalancing active. Olivia stared at the clock. Exactly 10 a.m. Not a minute early. Not a minute late. Exactly when Nathan said it would happen. The room froze. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Nobody moved. They simply stared at the displays. Then one engineer slowly looked toward Nathan. Another followed. Then another. The realization spread through the room like a wave. He had been right. Every warning. Every prediction. Every minute of the countdown. All of it. Carl stood slowly from his chair. His face had gone pale. Exactly 10 o'clock. No one answered. Because there was nothing to say. The evidence was glowing on every screen in the room. Olivia looked from the displays to Nathan. For the first time since she had met him, she truly understood what she was seeing. Not a groundskeeper guessing. Not a former expert remembering old knowledge. She was looking at the one person who had understood the entire situation before anyone else. Another notification sounded. Then another. The crisis was no longer approaching. It was here. Yet Nathan did not celebrate. He did not remind anyone that he had warned them. He did not ask for apologies. Instead, he stepped closer to the operations table and looked directly at the engineering team. His voice remained calm. Now, we stop watching. The room turned toward him. Nathan placed both hands on the table and studied the system map. Now we start fixing it. The control center exploded into motion. Engineers returned to their stations. Analysts opened new diagnostic windows. Managers picked up phones and began coordinating responses across the campus. Yet amid the sudden activity, one thing stood out. Nobody was giving orders except Nathan. Not officially. Not because of a title. Because every person in the room understood that he was the one who knew what to do next. Nathan studied the system map for several seconds. The fault had finally revealed itself. Hidden beneath layers of automatic corrections and misleading symptoms, the real problem now sat exposed in plain sight. Open the environmental monitoring archive from 72 hours ago, he said. An analyst immediately obeyed. Now compare it to the regulator activity log. Another engineer brought the files onto the main display. Within moments, the connection appeared. Several people gasped quietly. The timelines matched perfectly. Every abnormal correction traced back to a single source. Olivia stared at the screen. That was it. Nathan nodded. That was always it. Carl looked stunned. We spent 3 days looking everywhere else. Because the system kept distracting you, Nathan replied. It was protecting itself. The engineers no longer questioned his explanations. They simply followed them. Another analyst raised a hand. If we isolate the source now, can we stabilize the network? Nathan studied the numbers. Partially. Partially. The system has already adapted around the fault. Remove it too quickly, and you create new problems. Olivia nodded slowly. She understood. So we guide the recovery instead of forcing it. Nathan looked at her. Exactly. The room became focused again. This was no longer a mystery. It was a solution. Across the campus, operations continued under temporary protocols. Some systems ran in reduced mode. Others shifted automatically to protected configurations. The disruption remained contained, but only because the control center was finally responding to the correct problem. Nathan moved around the operations table, reviewing data from multiple departments. The confidence in his movements came not from ego but from familiarity. He knew these systems because years earlier he had helped imagine them before they even existed. He understood how they behaved under pressure because he had spent thousands of hours studying those behaviors. A young engineer watched him carefully. You really designed this? Nathan glanced at the monitor. Part of it. Why leave? The question escaped before the engineer could stop himself. The room grew quieter. Nathan remained silent for a moment. Then he answered, because there are moments in life when something more important needs you. Nobody asked another question. They all knew he meant his family. Olivia looked at him differently now. Not as a mystery. Not as a former expert hiding among maintenance crews. She saw a man who had made a choice years ago and never regretted it. Another notification appeared. This time it was different. The compensation rate had stopped increasing. Several engineers immediately noticed. Hold on. What is it? Olivia asked. The analyst pointed toward the display. The escalation just slowed. Nathan looked up. Good. Good. That means the system finally recognizes the correct correction path. The engineer smiled for the first time all morning. Another set of reports arrived. Then another. Each one showed the same trend. Stabilization. Slow. Gradual. Real. The tension in the room began to ease. Shoulders relaxed. Conversations became calmer. For the first time since the countdown ended, people could breathe again. Carl stared at the data in disbelief. We are recovering. Nathan nodded. We are. You knew this would work? Nathan gave a faint smile. I hoped it would. Olivia laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh anyone had heard all day. That is the first uncertain thing I have heard you say. Nathan looked at the monitors. The future is always uncertain. Patterns just make it easier to see. Minutes passed. The indicators continued improving. Critical systems stabilized. Backup operations synchronized correctly. The cascade of warnings slowed until only a handful remained. One by one, the screens returned to normal colors. The crisis was ending. Yet something even more remarkable was happening. The room that had laughed at Nathan earlier that morning now listened to every word he spoke. Not because he demanded respect, because he had earned it. Quietly, patiently, without ever asking for it. Olivia watched him standing beside the operations table, still wearing the same maintenance jacket he had worn when he walked into the building. The same work boots. The same calm expression. Nothing about him had changed. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else finally understood. By early afternoon, the control center looked completely different from the room Nathan had entered that morning. The warning indicators had largely disappeared. The emergency protocols were winding down. Engineers who had spent hours staring at screens with anxious expressions now exchanged cautious smiles. Conversations sounded lighter. Coffee cups were finally being emptied instead of forgotten. The crisis had passed. Yet nobody seemed eager to leave. There was still one question hanging over the room. Olivia stood alone near the operations table reviewing the final recovery report. The numbers confirmed what everyone already knew. The facility had avoided a major disruption because one person noticed what nobody else saw. She looked across the room toward Nathan. He was gathering his things as if the day had been completely ordinary. His maintenance gloves rested beside his notebook. His faded green jacket still carried traces of dirt from the grounds. The contrast was almost impossible to ignore. A man capable of guiding an entire operations center back to stability looked exactly like the groundskeeper everyone had overlooked. Nathan, Olivia said quietly. He looked up. Yes. Can we talk? Nathan nodded. They moved toward a small conference room overlooking the northern section of campus. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The distant utility structures stood peacefully against the afternoon sky. For several moments, neither spoke. Olivia studied the recovery report in her hands. There is something I still do not understand. Nathan smiled faintly. Only one thing. The joke surprised her enough to earn a small laugh. Then her expression grew serious again. Why did you leave? Nathan looked out the window. The answer did not come immediately. When it finally arrived, it was softer than she expected. My wife and I used to talk about the future all the time. Olivia remained silent. Nathan continued. We had plans, careers, goals. We thought we had decades. The room grew quiet. Then she got sick. He stared toward the horizon. Everything changed after that. Olivia listened without interrupting. When Emma was born, I thought I could balance everything. Work, family, ambition, responsibility. Nathan shook his head gently. Life does not always negotiate. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the glass. Somewhere outside, a maintenance vehicle crossed a service road. The ordinary sounds of the campus drifted through the distance. After my wife passed away, Nathan said, I looked at my calendar one day and realized something. Olivia waited. Every meeting was scheduled. Every project was planned. Every deadline mattered. He paused. But the most important person in my life was growing up while I was sitting in conference rooms. The words settled heavily between them. Olivia lowered her eyes. Nathan smiled softly. Emma needed a father, not a title. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Olivia asked the question that had been bothering her all day. Do you regret it? Nathan answered immediately. Not for a second. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth. The certainty in his voice affected her more than any technical explanation he had given earlier. Back in the control center, several engineers continued reviewing archived records. The deeper they searched, the more they discovered. Awards, publications, industry recognition, major infrastructure projects. Nathan's name appeared everywhere. Yet he had never mentioned any of it. Not once. Carl Mercer entered the conference room carrying a folder. His expression was unusually serious. I owe you an apology. Nathan looked at him calmly. Carl placed the folder on the table. Actually, I owe you several. Nathan smiled. You are not the first person to underestimate me. Carl shook his head. That does not make it right. The executive opened the folder. Inside were copies of personnel reports, archived achievements, and old photographs from Nathan's previous career. You should have been running this place. Nathan glanced at the documents and then looked away. Maybe. Carl frowned. Maybe. Nathan's eyes drifted toward a picture of Emma displayed on his phone screen. Or maybe I was exactly where I needed to be. For the second time that day, the room became completely silent. Not because of fear. Not because of uncertainty. Because everyone present understood something important. The most impressive thing about Nathan Cole was not that he predicted a system failure. It was that he had spent years quietly choosing what mattered most and never once asked anyone to notice. The sun was beginning to sink behind the trees when Nathan finally left Ridgeway Energy campus. The long shadows of late afternoon stretched across the parking lots and service roads. The crisis was over. The systems were stable. The reports were complete. Yet none of that was what occupied his thoughts as he drove home. He was thinking about Emma. He was thinking about dinner. He was thinking about the simple promise he had made that morning to be there when she got home from school. Some victories happened in conference rooms. Others happened around kitchen tables. Nathan knew which ones mattered most. As he pulled into the driveway of the small white house he had called home for nearly a decade, he saw Emma already sitting on the front porch steps. The moment she spotted his truck, she jumped to her feet and ran toward him. Nathan stepped out and smiled. How was the science test? Emma grinned. I got an A. I knew you would. She studied his face carefully. And you look tired. Nathan laughed softly. That obvious? Very obvious. Together they walked toward the house. The evening air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass from a nearby yard. Somewhere down the street, children rode bicycles beneath the fading sunlight. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a neighboring lawn. It was an ordinary evening, the kind of evening Nathan treasured. Inside the house, they prepared dinner together. Emma talked about school projects, friends, and plans for the weekend. Nathan listened the way he always did. Fully, patiently, as if every word mattered. Because to him, it did. Halfway through dinner, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Olivia Bennett. Emma noticed immediately. Work? Nathan nodded. Probably. Are you going to answer? Nathan looked at his daughter. Then he smiled and placed the phone face down on the table. After dinner, Emma's smile widened. Good answer. An hour later, as the sky turned orange and gold, Nathan stepped onto the front porch with a cup of coffee. The neighborhood had grown quiet. A soft breeze moved through the trees. The phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Hello. Olivia's voice sounded different than it had that morning. Softer. Warmer. I hope I am not interrupting. Nathan looked through the window and saw Emma finishing homework at the kitchen table. Not anymore. Olivia laughed quietly. The board met this afternoon. Nathan already knew where the conversation was heading. And they want to offer you a position. Nathan smiled. I figured. Not just any position. She paused. A very significant one. Nathan looked toward the sunset. The colors painted the horizon with shades of amber and gold. Beautiful. Brief. Impossible to keep. That is kind of them. Olivia waited. You are going to say no, aren't you? Nathan smiled again. Probably. May I ask why? Nathan leaned against the porch railing. Because every important thing in my life is already here. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Understanding. Olivia finally spoke. You know, there are people at the facility who spent years trying to earn the respect you gained in a single day. Nathan looked through the window at Emma. Respect is not something you chase. No, it is something you practice. The evening breeze carried the sound of distant laughter from somewhere down the street. Olivia remained quiet for several seconds. Then she said, For what it is worth, you changed a lot of minds today. Nathan shook his head gently. Maybe. Not maybe. Her voice carried conviction. Definitely. After the call ended, Nathan remained on the porch for a while longer. The neighborhood lights gradually flickered on. The sky darkened. Stars began appearing above the rooftops. Through the front window, he could see Emma waving for him to come back inside. Nathan waved back. Then he stood and walked toward the door. Hundreds of people would remember the day a quiet groundskeeper predicted a failure nobody else saw coming. Executives would remember it. Engineers would remember it. Reports would remember it. But years later, when the details had faded and the numbers were forgotten, the truth would remain simple. The smartest person in the room was never the loudest. The strongest person was not the one with the biggest title. And sometimes the greatest act of wisdom was not building a remarkable career. Sometimes it was knowing exactly when to step away from one. As Nathan closed the front door behind him and joined his daughter at the kitchen table, peace settled over the house. The world outside continued moving. Meetings would happen tomorrow. Systems would be monitored. New problems would appear. But for one quiet evening, none of that mattered. Because the man everyone finally learned to respect was exactly where he wanted to be.